A wounded veteran reunited with his old service dog. What happened next had the doctors in disbelief. Dr. Richard Stanton's footsteps echoed through the pristine halls of Mercy Hospital. Head of neurosurgery and renowned for his brilliant mind, Stanton exuded an aura of arrogance that matched his spotless reputation. He paused at the nurse's station to review his schedule for the day, back-to-back surgeries, as usual. No time for distractions or sentimentality. As he turned to leave, a commotion at the entrance caught his attention. A haggard-looking man in a faded military jacket burst through the doors, one leg dragging behind in a limp. The man's face was gaunt and unshaven, his eyes wild with desperation. "I need to see Dr. Stanton," he shouted. "It's about my dog." Stanton rolled his eyes and signaled for security. He had no time for this nonsense. A dog was just an animal after all, easily replaceable. And he had real patients to attend to. As security escorted the man out, Stanton caught a glimpse of the name patch on his jacket, Callahan. The name seemed vaguely familiar, but he dismissed it and hurried on to his first surgery of the day. Little did Dr. Stanton know, his cold dismissal had just set in motion a series of events that would soon upend his perfectly controlled world, and teach him a profound lesson about the unbreakable bonds between humans and animals. Jake Callahan sat on the curb outside Mercy Hospital, his head in his hands. Hot tears of frustration burned his eyes as he remembered Dr. Stanton's cold, uncaring expression. How could anyone be so heartless? Duke wasn't just a dog, he was Jake's lifeline, his anchor in the storm of PTSD and pain that had consumed him since returning from combat. Jake's mind drifted back to those dark days after his injury, waking up alone in a hospital bed, his leg shattered and his spirit broken. The only light in that darkness had been Duke, his loyal service dog, always by his side with a comforting nudge or a playful lick. But then Jake's recovery had taken longer than expected, and the military had reassigned Duke to another handler. Jake had been devastated, but he'd found solace in the knowledge that Duke would be helping someone else, at least. But then he'd gotten the news. Duke had ended up with Dr. Richard Stanton, a man with a reputation for mistreating service animals. Jake couldn't bear the thought of his beloved companion suffering at the hands of that cold-hearted surgeon. He had to get Duke back, no matter what it took. With a grunt of pain, Jake hauled himself to his feet. He may be wounded in body, but his warrior spirit still burned bright. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a familiar number, his old buddy Miguel from his Marine unit. If anyone could help him take on a man like Stanton, it was his brothers in arms. "Miguel? It's Jake. I need your help, man. It's time to bring Duke home." 200 miles away, in a rundown trailer park on the outskirts of town, a grizzled German shepherd lay in the dirt, chained to a rusted post. Though his once lustrous coat was now matted with filth, and his ribs protruded sharply beneath his skin, there was no mistaking the distinctive military tattoo in his ear, the mark of a retired service dog. This was Duke, Jake Callahan's missing companion. As the sun beat down mercilessly, Duke lifted his head at the sound of an approaching car. He watched listlessly as a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out and strode toward him. It was his new owner, Dr. Richard Stanton. Duke had known cruelty in his short time with the man, starvation, beatings, neglect, but his spirit remained unbroken. Somewhere deep inside, he clung to the memory of his true master, the brave Marine who had loved him. Stanton reached the dog and glared down, his mouth twisting into a sneer. "Still alive, mutt?" He aimed a kick at Duke's side, but the dog deftly rolled away. "Useless beast. I should have left you in the pound to rot." With that, Stanton turned on his heel and stormed back to the car. As the engine revved and the car sped away, Duke laid his head back on his paws. But there was a new light in his eyes, a spark of hope that had been missing before. Somehow, he sensed that change was coming, that his true master was out there, fighting to bring him home. And this time, Duke would be ready. He would survive this hell, for Jake. Because a bond like theirs could never be broken, not by time or distance, or even the cruelest of fates. Dr. Emily Huang carefully bandaged the wound on the old hound's leg as her assistant prepared the next patient. It had been another long day at Mercy Animal Clinic, emergency surgeries, abused rescues, neglected strays. Sometimes the suffering seemed endless. But Emily poured her heart into every creature that crossed her path, determined to make a difference one life at a time. As she finished with the hound, she heard the front door chime, signaling a new arrival. She glanced up and was surprised to see two men in Marine Corps fatigues walking in. One moved with the easy grace of a soldier, but the other limped heavily, leaning on a cane. As Emily approached, she caught the battered name tag, Callahan. "Sergeant Jake Callahan?" She extended a hand. "I'm Dr. Emily Huang. How can I help you?" Jake shook her hand, his grip strong despite his haggard appearance. "I'm here about a service dog, Duke. I believe he was brought here by a Dr. Richard Stanton." Jake's jaw tightened. "Duke was my partner, but he was taken from me when I was injured. Now I've learned Stanton's been mistreating him. I need your help to get him back." Emily's heart clenched. She was all too familiar with Stanton's reputation. She'd treated several of his pets for suspicious injuries. But she hesitated. Getting involved could jeopardize her clinic. Then she looked in Jake's eyes and saw the depth of his pain, his desperation. How could she turn away a brother in arms? She squared her shoulders. "I'll do whatever I can, Sergeant Callahan. Let me pull Duke's records." As Emily hurried to her office, the seed of something powerful took root. A community poised to come together, to stand up for one of their own. A wounded warrior and his faithful dog, ready to fight their way back to each other against all odds. And at the center of it all, a cold-hearted surgeon about to learn the true meaning of loyalty, compassion, and consequences. Word of Jake Callahan's plight spread like wildfire through the tight-knit veteran community. Men and women who had once served together, bonded by blood and sacrifice, rallied to support one of their own. They descended upon Mercy Animal Clinic in droves, offering resources, time, and unwavering loyalty to Jake and Duke's cause. Among them was Sergeant Miguel Ramos, Jake's closest battle buddy. With his easy smile and natural charisma, Miguel quickly became the unifying force of the operation, his optimism lifting spirits and spurring others to action. He organized search parties to comb the town for any sign of Duke, put together fundraisers to offset Jake's mounting medical and legal bills. His tireless energy and compassion touched all who met him, including Emily, who found herself drawn to the handsome soldier's zest for life. As the days became weeks, Mercy Animal Clinic transformed into the bustling heart of a community on a mission. Volunteers answered phones, collated evidence against Dr. Stanton, and worked to spread Duke's story to the media. Veterans took shifts at Jake's bedside, ensuring their brother was never alone as he fought to heal body and soul. Even civilians who had never served found themselves swept up in the spirit of unity, donating supplies and offering prayers. Through it all, Jake clung to hope with the tenacity that had served him in battle. But some days, the pain and despair felt insurmountable. His body ached for relief, his mind careened through dark memories. He missed Duke so viscerally it was like a piece of his soul had been ripped away. On one such day, as Jake lay despondent in his bed, a warm hand suddenly engulfed his. He looked up to see Miguel smiling down at him, eyes bright. "We found him, Jake. We found Duke. Dr. Huang is on the way to get him right now." For the first time since his injury, Jake felt like he could breathe again. He had his brother beside him, an army at his back, and the promise of reunion with his dearest friend. But the battle was far from over. Richard Stanton still had Duke, and a man that cold would not relinquish anything without a vicious fight. Dr. Richard Stanton slammed his office doors so hard the walls shook. Everywhere he turned, that damned dog was haunting him. On the news, in the papers, even in whispers among his own staff. The once unassailable surgeon now found himself the target of a relentless smear campaign, his cruelty laid bare for all to see. But Richard Stanton was not a man to bow to public pressure. He had worked too hard, climbed too high, to let some mangy mutt and a crippled soldier bring him down. This was his town, his hospital, and he would be damned if he let them forget it. A sharp knock sounded at the door. Dr. Stanton? It was Melanie, his head nurse. There's a situation in the lobby. That Marine and his crew are back, and this time they have a court order. They're demanding we release the dog's medical records. Stanton clenched his fists, a vein throbbing in his temple. The audacity. First they dragged his name through the mud, and now they dared to challenge his authority in his own domain? Stall them, he snapped. I'll handle this myself. As Melanie hurried out, Stanton reached for his phone. It was time to call in some favors, to remind certain people of the debts they owed. He would bury Callahan and his band of misfits in legal red tape, bleed them dry of resources and hope. But even as he plotted, a flicker of doubt crept in. The way that dog had looked at him, those soulful eyes boring into his very core. The unbreakable devotion he witnessed between Callahan and the mutt, even from afar. It unnerved him, stirred something long buried. Stanton shook off the feeling with a growl. Sentimentality was a weakness, and he had none of either. He would crush Jake Callahan like the insect he was. And that goddamn dog? By the time Richard Stanton was done, there wouldn't be enough left of it to fill a soup bowl. Emily Huang gripped the steering wheel, her heart pounding as she sped down the highway towards Stanton's property. In the passenger seat, Miguel Ramos double-checked the court order, his jaw set with grim determination. They had known getting the order would be an uphill battle, but the groundswell of community support had tipped the scales. Volunteers had worked tirelessly gathering evidence of Stanton's abuses, veterans had packed the courtroom in silent solidarity, and Jake himself had given heart-wrenching testimony about the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his service dog. In the end, the judge had no choice but to grant their petition. Now, armed with the full weight of the law, they were finally on their way to bring Duke home. As they pulled up to the ramshackle trailer, Emily's stomach turned at the sight of the emaciated dog chained out front. Duke lifted his head weakly, his once vibrant eyes dull with pain and neglect. "Dear God," Miguel breathed. "We have to get him out of here." But as they approached, the trailer door banged open and Richard Stanton burst out, his face twisted with rage. "Get the hell off my property. That dog is mine. I have the papers to prove it." Miguel held up the court order. "Not anymore, you don't. We're taking Duke, and we're reporting you for animal abuse." "It's over, Stanton." Stanton's eyes bulged, spittle flying as he screamed. "You have no right. No right. I'll bury you. I'll bury all of you." He lunged forward, but Miguel easily sidestepped him. In one swift motion, he unlocked Duke's chain, and the dog immediately staggered to his feet. But rather than run to Miguel, Duke limped straight past him and sank his teeth into Stanton's leg. The surgeon howled, flailing wildly as he tried to shake off the dog. But even in his weakened state, Duke held on with the tenacity of a true soldier, defending the men who had come to his aid. And in that moment, as Emily watched the once arrogant doctor brought low by the very creature he had tormented, she knew they had won more than just a legal battle. They had struck a blow for every voiceless victim, every powerless soul. Duke had reclaimed his dignity. And Richard Stanton? He would never torment another living being again. The waiting room at Mercy Animal Clinic overflowed with veterans, volunteers, and well-wishers, all anxiously awaiting news of Duke's condition. Jake sat at the center of the crowd, his crutches laid aside, hands clasped as if in prayer. Though exhaustion lined his face, there was a newfound light in his eyes, the light of hope reborn. Beside him, Miguel and a few other soldiers traded stories of their service days, their laughter rising above the worried murmurs. They spoke of camaraderie, of purpose, of the unshakable bond between battle buddies. And though none said it aloud, they all knew that bond extended to the brave dog who had served alongside them, who even now fought for his life in the operating room down the hall. Emily and her team had been working on Duke for hours, racing to undo the damage wrought by Stanton's cruelty. Malnutrition, infected wounds, rampant parasites, it was like nothing Emily had ever seen. But she refused to give up, pouring every ounce of skill and determination into saving this incredible dog. As the hours dragged on, the crowd never wavered. People took turns making coffee runs, handing out sandwiches, offering hugs and prayers. A group of local schoolchildren arrived with armfuls of handmade cards, each one adorned with crayoned images of a happy dog and soldier. Jake accepted them with misty eyes, marveling at the outpouring of love from a community he barely knew. Just past midnight, as Jake was beginning to despair, the operating room doors finally swung open. Emily emerged, her surgical cap askew and eyes heavy with fatigue. A hush fell over the room as she approached Jake, her expression unreadable. Jake struggled to his feet, bracing for the worst. But then Emily broke into a weary smile, her hand coming to rest on his shoulder. "He made it, Jake. Duke's a fighter, just like his soldier. He's going to be okay." The room erupted into whoops and cheers, tears and laughter. Veterans pumped their fists, volunteers embraced, children danced with glee. Jake sagged against Emily, his relief so profound it stole his breath. And down the hall, in a dimly lit recovery room, Duke slept peacefully for the first time in months. The battle was far from over, for him and for Jake. But they would fight it together now, side by side, as they always had. Unbreakable. Unbeatable. Bound by a love that even the darkest cruelty could never sever. In the weeks that followed, Mercy Animal Clinic became Duke's second home as he slowly recovered under Emily and her team's devoted care. Jake was a constant presence, spending every spare moment at his dog's side, coaxing him through physical therapy and soothing his nightmares. Though Jake's own wound still pained him, he poured all his focus into Duke's healing, as if by sheer force of will he could mend them both. And mend they did, in body and spirit, day by hard-fought day. As Duke regained weight and strength, the spark returned to his eyes, the spring to his step. He greeted each morning with a joyful bark, his tail wagging at the sight of Jake's smile. For Jake, every tiny victory felt momentous, a meal finished, a new command mastered, another foot of distance walked. With each passing day, he felt the abyss of his trauma receding, replaced by a tentative but growing sense of pride and purpose. Emily watched their progress with quiet awe, marveling at the power of their bond. And as she worked alongside Jake, coaching him through exercises, celebrating each milestone, she felt her own heart healing in ways she hadn't realized it needed. Here, in the love between a broken man and a battered dog, she found a renewed sense of hope, a faith in the resiliency of the spirit. That faith was put to the test the day Richard Stanton returned, flanked by a team of high-powered lawyers. He had come to reclaim Duke, waving a sheaf of papers and threatening legal hellfire. But this time, he faced more than a broken soldier and a few ragtag volunteers. He faced a community united, a hospital staff who had seen the truth behind his polished facade. And at their center stood Emily, chin high and eyes blazing, armed with the ironclad records of Duke's abuse and her own unimpeachable reputation. In the end, Stanton's threats rang hollow. His own colleagues turned on him, disgusted by the depths of his cruelty. The board of directors unanimously voted to strip him of his privileges and terminate his employment. Faced with the ruin of his career and the looming specter of criminal charges, Stanton had no choice but to slink away in disgrace, his tail between his legs. It was a turning point for them all, a victory not just for Jake and Duke, but for the indomitable spirit of a community that had rallied around them. They had stared down a monster and emerged stronger, more united than ever. And though the scars of the ordeal would linger, they knew now that together, they could overcome anything. As the dust settled, Emily found herself standing beside Miguel, watching Jake and Duke play in the clinic's sunny courtyard. The dog bounded after a ball, his tail a metronome of pure joy, while Jake laughed with carefree abandon. "Look at them," Miguel murmured, his eyes soft. "It's like they've been reborn." Emily nodded, her own heart full to bursting. "They saved each other." "We all did, in a way." Miguel turned to her then, his gaze intent. "Emily, I don't want this to end. What you've done here, what we've all built together. It's special. It's once in a lifetime." He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her own. "Stay with us. Stay with me. Let's see what else we can rebuild together." And as Emily looked from their joined hands to Jake and Duke, laughing in the sun, she realized that this was more than just an ending. It was a beginning, forged in hope and healing, tempered by the unbreakable bonds of love. And she couldn't wait to see where it would lead them next. Weeks turned to months, and life in the little town settled into a new rhythm. Jake and Duke became fixtures at the animal clinic, unofficial mascots and beacons of hope for every struggling pet and owner who passed through its doors. Under Emily's guidance, Jake discovered a talent for connecting with even the most traumatized animals, his gentle patience born of hard-won experience. Together, he and Emily began to dream of expanding the clinic's mission, of creating a sanctuary for service dogs and their wounded warriors, a place of healing for bodies and souls alike. It would be a daunting undertaking, demanding every ounce of their combined skill and dedication. But with Miguel and their army of volunteers beside them, they knew nothing was impossible. Even as they planned and worked, the bond between them deepened, taking root in the fertile soil of shared purpose. Lingering glances became gentle touches, stolen moments of laughter and comfort in the midst of long, grueling days. And when at last Miguel took Emily in his arms and kissed her beneath a starry summer sky, it felt less like a first and more like a homecoming, the inevitable meeting of two hearts destined to beat as one. Through it all, Duke remained their guiding light, the living embodiment of all they hoped to achieve. Where once Jake had fought to save Duke, now it was Duke who saved others, who taught traumatized dogs to trust again, showed stricken soldiers that hope endured. His presence was a constant reminder that even the deepest scars could heal, that from the ashes of suffering, new life could bloom. And so the seasons turned, and the little town that had once been so divided found itself knit together by 1,000 tiny acts of grace. The children who had made cards for Duke now volunteered at the clinic, grooming dogs and socializing kittens. The veterans who had stood vigil now lent their skills to building repairs and fundraising drives. And at the center of it all, Jake and Emily and Miguel worked tirelessly, pouring their hearts into a dream that grew larger by the day. They knew challenges loomed on the horizon, that Stanton's ghost still haunted them, that there would be setbacks and obstacles ahead. But they also knew that they would face them as they had everything else, together, bound by a love that had been tested in the crucible of adversity and emerged unbreakable. And so they labored and laughed and loved, planting seeds of hope in the hearts of all they touched. Knowing that one day, those seeds would bloom into a legacy of healing that would endure long after they were gone. The grand opening of the Mercy Sanctuary was a day of triumph and tears, the culmination of a year's tireless effort from the entire community. Flags fluttered in the crisp autumn breeze as Jake and Emily, hand in hand, cut the ribbon to thunderous applause. At their side stood Duke, his coat glossy and eyes bright, the very image of resilience and hope. As the crowd streamed into the state-of-the-art facility, marveling at the airy kennels and serene therapy gardens, Jake felt his heart swell with quiet pride. This was more than just a building, it was a promise kept, a dream made real through the sheer power of love and determination. Every brick, every beam was inscribed with the names of those who had made it possible, the volunteers, the donors, the countless small acts of kindness that had carried them through their darkest days. For Jake, the sanctuary represented a new chapter, a chance to pay forward the miracles that had saved him and Duke. As he watched wounded warriors and their four-legged partners begin their own journeys of healing, he knew that this was his true calling, to be a beacon of hope for those lost in the darkness, just as others had been for him. And he wasn't alone in that mission. At his side stood Emily, her eyes shining with the same fierce compassion that had first drawn him to her. In the whirlwind months of planning and building, their love had only grown stronger, tempered by shared purpose and unshakable faith. With Emily's medical genius and nurturing heart, Jake knew the sanctuary, and he would be in the best of hands. Beside them, Miguel presided over the festivities with his signature charisma, his laughter booming across the grounds. The once battle-hardened Marine had found new purpose in this mission of healing, his strategic mind and tireless spirit vital to bringing the sanctuary to life. And if his eyes lingered on Emily with a special tenderness, if his hand sought Jake's quiet moments of camaraderie, well, that was only natural. The love between the three of them as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. As the day wore on in a blur of laughter, tears, and wagging tails, Jake found a moment to slip away, Duke padding loyally at his heels. They wandered through the gardens, soaking in the peace and stillness, until they came to a small, secluded grove. There, gleaming in the dappled sunlight, stood a simple bronze plaque, inscribed with the names of the fallen, the soldiers, both human and canine, who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Jake knelt, tracing the names with a reverent finger, silent tears streaming down his cheeks. For a moment, he was back on the battlefield, choking on smoke and blood and grief. But then Duke was there, warm and solid and alive, nuzzling into his side with a soft whine. And Jake knew that every loss, every scar, had led them here, to this place of healing, this sanctuary where love could grow from the ashes of war. He rose, dusting off his knees, and looked out over the bustling grounds, the laughter drifting on the breeze. Somewhere out there, Stanton languished in disgrace, a broken man shattered by the weight of his own cruelty. But here, in this garden, in the hearts of all who had made this dream possible, here, love had won. And as long as there were those willing to fight for it, to nurture it with acts of courage and compassion, it always would. Hand in paw, Jake and Duke made their way back to the celebration and the waiting arms of their loved ones. Their battle was over, but the mission endured. And together, they would see it through to the end. As the months passed and the Mercy Sanctuary thrived, Jake, Emily, and Miguel settled into their new roles as co-directors, their partnership as seamless in leadership as it was in love. Under their guidance, the sanctuary became more than just a place of healing. It became a beacon of hope for the entire community, a shining example of the power of compassion and resilience. Veterans from all walks of life found solace in its welcoming walls, their shattered spirits soothed by the unconditional love of their four-legged partners. Children learned empathy and responsibility by volunteering in the kennels, their laughter mingling with the happy barks of healing hounds. And through it all, Jake and Duke remained the heart of the operation, their unbreakable bond a constant reminder of the transformative power of love. But even as they poured themselves into their work, Jake, Emily, and Miguel never forgot to nurture the love that had brought them together. They stole moments of tenderness in between meetings and therapy sessions, shared laughter over morning coffee and evening strolls with the dogs. And slowly, tentatively, they began to dream of a future beyond the sanctuary walls, of a home and family built on the foundation of their unshakable bond. It was Emily who broached the subject first, her eyes shining with nervous hope as they sat in the sanctuary's sun-dappled courtyard. "I know it might seem sudden," she murmured, reaching for their hands, "but life has taught me that every moment is precious. And I want to spend all of mine with you, both of you, for as long as I live." Jake felt his heart swell, his vision blurring with sudden tears. He had never dared to dream of happiness like this, a love that healed instead of hurt, that built instead of destroyed. But looking into Emily's eyes, feeling the warmth of Miguel's hand in his, he knew that this was more than just a dream. It was a promise, a covenant born of the trials they had faced together. "I want that too," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "More than anything." Miguel nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "We've already built so much together," he said softly. "A family feels like the natural next step." And so, with laughter and tears and wagging tails as their witnesses, they began to plan a future together, one filled with love, laughter, and the endless joys of serving others. They would face challenges, of course, as all families did. But they would face them together, secure in the knowledge that their love could weather any storm. As they sat there in the golden afternoon light, Jake felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. For so long, he had been running from his pain, his past, his very self. But here, in the arms of his beloved and the shadow of their shared dream, he had finally found a place to call home. And he knew, with a certainty that resonated to his very bones, that no matter what the future held, they would face it as they had everything else, hand in hand, heart to heart, bound by a love that knew no bounds. Together, they would build a legacy of hope, one paw print at a time. The wedding was a joyous affair, a celebration not just of Jake, Emily, and Miguel's love, but of the community that had brought them together. They exchanged vows in the sanctuary's memorial garden, surrounded by the people and animals they had touched over the years. There wasn't a dry eye in the house as they pledged their hearts to one another, their voices trembling with emotion and conviction. Duke, of course, played a starring role in the ceremony, serving as both ring-bearer and best man. He pranced down the aisle with his head held high, his tail wagging in time to the music. And when the newly wedded trio sealed their union with a kiss, it was Duke's joyful bark that led the chorus of cheers. In the years that followed, the sanctuary continued to thrive under their leadership, expanding its reach and deepening its impact with every passing season. Jake and Miguel took point on the veteran outreach programs, their shared experiences forging unbreakable bonds with the soldiers in their care. Emily oversaw the medical side of the operation, her cutting-edge therapies and tireless compassion saving countless lives, both human and canine. And through it all, their love remained the guiding light of the sanctuary, the heart and soul of every victory, every milestone, every quiet moment of grace. They faced trials and triumphs as they always had, together, bound by the unshakable conviction that in unity, there was strength enough to move mountains. They saw it in the eyes of the veterans who arrived broken and left whole, their spirits rekindled by the love of a loyal dog. They felt it in the hugs of the families reunited, the children who found courage in the shadow of a gentle giant. And they lived it in every shared smile, every whispered endearment, every stolen kiss in the sanctuary's sunlit halls. Their family grew along with their mission, filled with laughter and love of the two-legged and four-legged variety. And as they watched their children play with Duke in the gardens, his muzzle gone gray but his spirit as indomitable as ever, they knew that this was the legacy they had always been meant to build, a legacy of love, of healing, of hope that endured in the face of even the darkest odds. For Jake, every day was a reminder of how far he had come, from the shattered soldier bleeding out on a battlefield to the beloved husband, father, and healer he was now. There were still scars, of course, both visible and unseen. But they no longer defined him, no longer held him captive to the ghosts of his past. Instead, they were a testament to his resilience, to the love that had brought him back from the brink and given him a second chance at life. And he knew, with every fiber of his being, that he would spend the rest of his days honoring that gift, loving, leading, and serving with all the strength and courage of his unbreakable heart. Hand in hand with his beloved partners, surrounded by the family they had built and the love they had nurtured, Jake looked to the future with hope and joy in his heart. Come what may, they would face it together. Always. Years flown by like the turning of the seasons, each one bringing new joys and challenges to the sanctuary and the family at its heart. Jake and Emily and Miguel's children grew from tottering toddlers to spirited teenagers, their laughter echoing through the halls and gardens. The veterans they served became more than just patients, they became friends, confidants, extended family bound by the shared journey of healing. And through it all, Duke remained the constant, the beating heart of the sanctuary and the family he had helped to build. Even as his muzzle turned snow-white and his steps slowed, his spirit never wavered, his love never dimmed. He was there for every milestone, every celebration, every quiet moment of reflection, a living reminder of the miracles that had brought them all together. But the years could not be held at bay forever, and the day finally came when Duke's great heart gave its last, valiant beat. The sanctuary grieved as one, united in their love for the dog who had been so much more than just a mascot, who had been a savior, a teacher, a guiding light in the darkest of times. They laid him to rest in the memorial garden, his simple headstone nestled among the flowers and flags. And as they stood there, arms around each other, tears mingling with the soft patter of rain, Jake knew that this was not an ending, but a beginning, a chance to honor Duke's legacy by living every day with the love and courage he had embodied. In the years that followed, Jake and Emily and Miguel threw themselves into their work with renewed purpose, determined to make every moment count. They expanded the sanctuary's programs, partnering with other organizations to bring their message of hope to every corner of the country. They mentored a new generation of leaders, passing on the wisdom and compassion they had learned at the feet of a humble dog. And at night, wrapped in each other's arms, they would talk softly of the future, of the day when they would pass the torch to their children and their children's children, secure in the knowledge that Duke's legacy would endure long after they were gone. For Jake, every day was a gift, a chance to honor the love that had saved him and the mission that had given his life meaning. He knew there would still be struggles, still be moments when the ghosts of his past reared their ugly heads. But he also knew that he would never face them alone, that he had the love of his family, the support of his community, and the memory of a bond that even death could not break. And so he lived, fully, joyfully, gratefully. He savored every sunrise, every smile, every wagging tail and gentle kiss. He poured his heart into the work he loved, the people he cherished, the world he had helped to make a little brighter. And when at last his own time came, many years later, he slipped away peacefully, surrounded by the love and laughter of all he had held dear. And when at last his own time came, many years later, he slipped away peacefully, surrounded by the love and laughter of all he had held dear. They laid him to rest beside Duke, beneath a honey locust tree that showered the garden in dappled sunlight. On his headstone, they inscribed the words that had guided his life, the words that Duke had taught him so long ago. Love is stronger than fear. Hope is stronger than hate. And together, there is nothing we cannot overcome. As the sanctuary community gathered to remember Jake, they shared stories of the countless lives he had touched, the broken souls he had mended, the shattered hearts he had made whole. They spoke of his courage, his compassion, his unshakable faith in the goodness of the world and the people in it. And as their tears mingled with gentle smiles, as grief gave way to gratitude, they knew that his spirit would live on, in the work they did, the love they shared, the hope they carried in their hearts. Emily and Miguel grieved, of course, their hearts aching with the loss of the man who had been their partner, their soulmate, their guiding light. But even in their sorrow, they found solace in each other, in the family they had built, and the knowledge that Jake's love would never truly leave them. They saw him in their children's eyes, heard him in their laughter, felt him in every heartbeat of the sanctuary he had helped to build. And so they carried on, nurturing Jake and Duke's legacy with every act of kindness, every word of wisdom, every gentle touch of a healing hand. They watched their children grow into compassionate leaders, their grandchildren toddle through the gardens where once a broken soldier and a battered dog had found salvation. And in those quiet moments, when the sun dipped low and the breeze whispered through the locust leaves, they could almost feel Jake and Duke beside them, two hearts forever entwined, forever watching over the sanctuary that love had built. Years flowed into decades, generations into generations. The world changed, as worlds do, but the Heart of Mercy Sanctuary endured, a beacon of hope in an often uncertain world. And always, at its center, stood the story of a man and his dog, a reminder that love is a force more powerful than fear, more enduring than time, more precious than any treasure of the earth. Jake and Duke's tale became the stuff of legend, whispered around campfires, shared in moments of doubt and despair. And to all who heard it, it brought the promise of redemption, the knowledge that in our darkest hours, when all seems lost, love will light the way home. And so their legacy lived on, carried in the hearts of all who had known them, all who would come after. A legacy of courage, of compassion, of the unshakable bonds that make us human. A legacy that would endure as long as there were hearts to carry it, as long as there was love to light the way. For in the end, that was the truth Jake and Duke had taught the world, the truth that had saved them, the truth that would echo through the ages. Love is the answer. Love is the way. And as long as we hold fast to that truth, as long as we nurture it with acts of courage and compassion, there is no darkness we cannot face, no battle we cannot win. Together. Always.